Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans. I'm alone today. Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor, is out on vacation, and we hope she's having a very restful time. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement, and oversight, and how it all impacts you. We're here to inform and empower you by unraveling the complexities of policing, updating you on the consent decree, and engaging in conversations that matter on policing, oversight, and the community. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, otherwise known as OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure that NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and the federal monitors, allowing us to provide an impartial perspective on policing practices and investigations. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year, for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, and we'll go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We are advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and the disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage with the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced lawyers from the criminal justice field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in with your questions, comments, and concerns. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. We also encourage you to watch the live stream and to comment on that, and we'll try to respond to those comments as well. So I'm going to discuss and introduce today's guest, who is currently running late, but I'm going to introduce her. Her name is Edith Romero. She's an organizer with Eye on Surveillance, a coalition that works to end the government's expansion of surveillance tools that have historically criminalized people of color. Eye on Surveillance, otherwise known as EOS, works with the community to build a community safety options that dismantle the systems of oppression that we've known. Edith is also a poet. She's a researcher, an interpreter, an Honduran, and an immigrant worker. Edith is committed to bringing communities of care through political education, building community power, fighting against surveillance systems, and advocating for communities that center care and equity rather than inherently racist policing. So we look forward to her joining us very soon. Before Edith joins, I'm going to provide some updates right now on where everything is. I'm going to start with an update on the the hearing that was held this morning by Civil Service. This hearing is related to the issue of the promotions for NOPD's captains and majors that has been put on hold. There's been a lot of questions in the community on the status of that situation. So this morning, Civil Service heard the motion that was jointly filed by the Police Association of New Orleans and the Black Organization of Police. They filed a motion requesting an injunction into the matter, which means that they wanted to effectively freeze the list as it existed, and then they requested an evidentiary hearing, and they requested a full investigation into the promotional process to determine if any of the civil service rules or the Louisiana laws were violated. So today, this motion was heard by the Civil Service Commission. It was heard in City Council in the auditorium. Civil Service granted the motion for the evidentiary hearing. It is now scheduled for January 10th. And that will be an opportunity for Civil Service to determine whether or not to promote. Oh, sorry. They're going to determine whether the decision not to promote from the current list violated Article 10 of the Louisiana Constitution or the rules of the Civil Service Commission. The Civil Service Commission denied the Police Association of New Orleans and the Black Organization of Police request for an injunction, and they deferred any relief to the candidates requested by those organizations until the investigation concludes. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor sent a formal, we have a call, so I'm going to just take that call right now. All right, and you are on air. Welcome to the Monitors, Mike.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How y'all doing?
Good, thanks. This is
All
Mr.
right,
Batiste.
how you doing?
I recognize
Yes,
your voice.
I call. I call real quick to talk about consent decree, and I probably had a question for everyone out there. When we saw the president get elected, Donald Trump, and we saw that he said he's going to give police immunity, and then it made me think about the consent decree. What is going to happen with the consent decree when Donald Trump takes office? Because he said on January the 20th, he's putting all these things in place. And so it made me think about the consent decree. And my question is, I guess, I don't know if you can answer it, is the consent decree still going to be, in place, or should they sustain it right now and put some amendments or something in that the community can play a role in the consent decree, if you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying, and I think that's a really important question, and I think that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. So I really appreciate you calling in to ask that.
Yes, ma'am.
So when Donald Trump was a candidate, he did make a lot of broad promises regarding a lot of different industries, including policing. He's also historically said that he wanted the federal government to better match his agenda. And he, during his first term, instructed the Department of Justice to not enter into any new consent decrees. So for that reason, whenever you're looking at historically how many consent decrees our cities have entered into, there was kind of this 4-year gap where it looked like there was no work that was really done on a federal level regarding consent decrees. And that's because the Department of Justice was basically they pivoted during that term to focus on other issues. And then once Biden came into office, you saw a lot of municipalities then enter into new consent decrees, and you saw that work pick up again. So what's going to happen now? We don't really know, but if I was a betting person, I imagine I would say that the Department of Justice is again going to pivot away from pursuing new consent decrees with law enforcement agencies. So you're probably going to see more cities enter into consent agreements. You're probably going to see more settlements occur, and or you're just going to see these matters kind of linger for a while. So if a municipality was under investigation, that investigation might take longer or might never be completed, or if it is completed, it might not result in any type of legal remedy or litigation as a result of that investigation. So what is it going to mean for the consent decrees that are already out there? Well, that kind of depends on the efforts of the Department of Justice and what those attorneys are instructed to do. So the Department of Justice could basically ultimately, these are federal employees. So unless they have a legal protection for their job, some of their jobs might be reassigned or might be eliminated. We might see the Department of Justice become a little bit stretched thin in terms of their ability to weigh in on sustainment issues. We might see the Department of Justice pivot in such a way where they try to change their position as parties of consent decrees. Here, I imagine we're going to probably see the sustainment motion be heard by our judge, Judge Morgan, and we're probably going to proceed as as it appears that we're proceeding, as in we're going to see the sustainment period probably occur, and we might enter into that. Now, if we move in that direction, then in theory, the Department of Justice isn't going to be as heavily involved. So I imagine that will kind of keep New Orleans off the radar in some respects. That also means that we will be protected by federal law for a period until and if any additional federal legislation is passed. So if the president decides that he wants to file something federally to alter police oversight or to change the agenda of the Department of Justice, then it might influence us. But if there's any type of state action that happens, we will still see the sustainment strategy win out, because in terms of conflict of law, federal law is going to trump state law. So right now, if you are listening and if you're concerned about the state of the consent decree and potential sustainment in light of the election on Tuesday, then I would say that you should vocalize that to the federal monitors, to the Department of Justice, and to the judge. And one area that we've really heard a lot of feedback as we've been doing these public forums is that there's an interest in seeing local oversight get enshrined in the sustainment strategy and truly be kind of expanded in some ways. Expanded is the wrong word. I mean, protected and clearly, enshrined, clearly included in the sustainment strategy, and there being a strong commitment to local oversight, assuming some of the roles that federal oversight had previously had, and just kind of remaining in place through any sustainment period. This also might be a good time for the public to consider whether or not they would like a longer sustainment period. So the sustainment period right now is 2 years. And some of the feedback that we've received at public forums is, why 2 years? Why not longer? So if the sustainment strategy was in theory longer, then all of those reforms and efforts and all of the things that are required to be abided by during the sustainment period would go on for longer. So that might be a way to hypothetically ensure that the consent decree and that all of those reforms stay in place as long as possible, in light of any federal attacks that might occur. But I think it's kind of too soon to tell. I think we will know far more information once we start seeing who the eventual president appoints to different cabinet positions and to different federal agencies. And then we'll have a little bit more of an understanding about what the future of consent decrees and the DOJ might look like. But I imagine a lot of people are asking the same question as you, and I really appreciate you calling in to ask it.
Yes, and I got one more question.
Yes.
It's not a question for you though, Stella. My problem is in the city of New Orleans, we are looking at, I've been doing my own investigation of the sexual assault unit, the domestic unit, and the unit that supposed to investigate child abuse. And what I've been finding out lately is that this unit is failing. In 2014, I think it was 2014, they talked about them covering up rapes and sexual assaults. And we're looking at 2024, and we are right back to where we was in 2014, and we're in 2024 going through the same thing. But I commend you and your team. I commend you and your team because I read y'all report on the website about, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, sexual assaults, domestic, and you keep people very informed. So I want to commend you for your website, keeping people informed of what's going on and being very true. So I want to commend you on that. But I'm concerned, and I guess what I'm asking is that how do we take a deep dive into that sexual assault unit, and how do we ask the monitor, but just not the monitor, the NOPD, to do their job with that sexual assault unit, because we got evidence where they didn't covered up a lot of cases, and you know, the NOPD is talking about a consent decree and talking about how well they're doing, but nobody ain't talking about those children that's being abused in the city of New Orleans, and they're getting away because of high-figured people or who they connected to. They're connected to the judge, they're connected to the police. And again, this ain't nothing for your office, but I'm sick of it, Stella, because at the end of the day, when children are being harmed, women are being sexual assault, the HIV virus is being spreaded, and we see NOPD that's not doing nothing to help those women. How can we trust the NOPD sexual assault unit and everything? And how can we talk to those people and the victims and make them trust that unit again? Because we went through it in 2014 and we're in 2024 and we are going through it the same way. And I know you might can't answer because you're not over the unit, but I just wanted to see what's your thoughts on that, and I'm finished.
No, that's another great question. Thank you so much for bringing that to light, because this is something that was also highlighted during the public forum at Loyola Law School Uptown last Monday with the federal monitors and with the Department of Justice. And we actually had a researcher in the audience who brought to light that the federal monitors had mentioned that there was going to be some corrective strategies that needed to be adopted by the SVU unit and the NOPD regarding the way that they're conducting their investigations into sexual assaults. And additionally, you know, we have received similar concerns about the way that NOPD is conducting investigations into domestic violence as well. So right now, the NOPD is under a corrective action strategy for the way that they're handling gone-on-arrival investigations that have to do with sexual assault and domestic violence. And what that means is whenever the individual who calls 911, if they're not there at the scene when the NOPD arrives, they code it in as gone on arrival, GOA. However, what we're learning is that effectively the NOPD is sometimes taking hours to be able to get to a scene. And so these individuals, like, you know, have to go to work or have to pick up kids, have to like go about their life. And then the NOPD is coding it in as GOA, gone on arrival. And then there's no further follow-up. So they're now under a corrective action strategy that is requiring additional follow-up on those types of calls to make sure that those survivors and individuals who call 911 are able to receive the services that they are requesting. And then they're also under some corrective action strategies regarding the way that they're reporting their sexual assault data, especially considering all the data inaccuracies that we learned about back in March when we found out that NOPD was underreporting sex crimes to their federal partners. And in light of that underreporting, a lot of local organizations received less funding from the federal government and from other partners because there was a false narrative that sexual assaults were going down in New Orleans and there was less need. So again, like, you know, the actions of the NOPD have very real repercussions for our community and for these community-based organizations that are doing work with survivors. And so those two areas are addressed in the sustainment strategy as well. However, we don't see anything in the sustainment strategy as it currently exists about the quality of the investigations that are conducted by these units and about their clearance rate, which also right now is very low, as in they're not clearing a lot, they're not solving a lot of these sexual assault cases. So There are people in the community that would like to see those things included in the sustainment strategy. I do know there has been public comments submitted by some of the partners that work with my office on these topics. So I think the community should continue to push on this point to ensure that the sustainment strategy is as comprehensive as it needs to be able to address this division. Um, we really want to see the NOPD Special Victims Division (SVD) and the domestic violence work that they do receive all of the resources possible and have a higher clearance rate of the crimes being alleged that also ideally are going to have successful prosecutions. Again, we all need to be swimming in the same direction. And we want to be able to ensure that these survivors are safe and that their allegations are heard and considered and fully investigated as is required. So that is definitely an area that that I believe we're going to continue to push.
Thank
Um,
you so much.
of course,
Oh, go ahead.
of course. Um,
Thank you so much. You have been very enlightened. I appreciate that.
yes, I appreciate your call, and
Thank you.
I will also talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we've received from the community in terms of what they would like from the sustainment time or from the judge prior to any finding of a transition into sustainment. There were a lot of public forums over the month of October, and we greatly appreciate everyone who came out, who emailed, who talked to us over coffee, who went to public libraries in New Orleans East, Nora Navra in the 7th Ward, and Loyola Law School, and showed up at all of these events and made themselves heard. And I think it was so valuable. And I know it's really difficult to be able to make time for these types of activities. And I think participation fatigue is real. So we really do appreciate everyone coming out. I wanted to share
Yep.
some of the feedback that we received from the community at these hearings. The first was that there were a lot of concerns regarding the lack of information about the format and the purpose of any fairness hearing that would be held by the federal court. There was also frustration with the idea of the NOPD being released from the consent decree while there were still corrective action strategies for sex crime and DV data corrections and gone on arrivals. And there was also frustration about the idea of NOPD exiting active oversight while they're under a remedial action strategy about the Public Integrity Bureau. There was a lot of concerns expressed about potential conflicts that the deputy federal monitor might have by employing current and former NOPD employees for his monitoring team in Minnesota through his firm, Effective Law Enforcement for All, otherwise known as ELIFA. There were questions regarding data discrepancies in use of force, particularly around use of force used against Black residents in New Orleans. And there were many individuals that expressed a lot of concern and fear with the idea of NOPD exiting active oversight while these discrepancies existed because of the belief that this communicated bias against the African American community and that more force was used and more force was elevated against that community. There was frustration expressed that the Police Community Advisory Board plan has not been publicly shared with the community yet, and that PCABs, the Police Community Advisory Boards, are not in compliance, and they won't be in compliance prior to any potential sustainment. There was a desire for an additional public comment period. There was frustration expressed with the idea that that there was only 1 month for public comment, and that it was also a very eventful month with the elections and all of the get out to vote activities that were happening simultaneously. There were questions raised about the fact that the federal monitors have not conducted their biannual community survey since 2018. And as a result, we don't have that survey information that has acted as a barometer, like a temperature, for us to be able to know how the community truly feels about NOPD's performance. There was a desire to see alternative models of compliance be considered. And what I mean by that is people asked about partial compliance findings, which is a model that is being adopted by other municipalities that are under consent decrees, where the sections that are in full and effective compliance are moved into sustainment, but then the areas that are still under corrective action strategies or remedial action plans or are simply not in compliance stay under active oversight and then receive additional attention and support to be able to see those areas transition into full and effective compliance. And this is something that is happening in other places. So it's not unheard of. And I think community members were asking about it because they've heard that it's adopted by other places. There was some confusion over the status of the motion to terminate the consent decree. People asked what happens to that motion. And the answer that we were hearing from the federal monitors was that, in theory, that motion will become moot. As in, if the NOPD was to enter sustainment, then we would no longer hear a motion on whether or not the consent decree should be terminated. And then, as I mentioned before, there was request to see local oversight be recognized more in the sustainment strategy, just to ensure that it can continue the work that it's already doing. So again, we appreciate all of the feedback that we've heard from the community on these during these public forums. And I see that people are making comments online too, and I'm just going to scroll up to see. It looks like we have a lot of comments regarding the sex crimes unit, regarding how victims believe that they're being handled by that unit, and a lot of concerns about how the NOPD is addressing those types of allegations. And I see now that, that Edith is here. And so we're going to transition to talking to Eye on Surveillance. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much. You have enlightened us on a lot, gave us a good brief like you always do. And thank you just from coming everywhere in the community and meeting people where they are in the coffee shop. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. All right. So thank you so much for coming in today, Edith.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And here, do you mind just scooting that a little bit closer? So we are, first, for our listeners who are unfamiliar with Eye on Surveillance, what is Eye on Surveillance?
Yes. So Eye on Surveillance is a coalition of organizations and residents of New Orleans and Louisiana that came together to organize and work against the expansion of surveillance systems and tools in the city, but also to work towards safer communities, considering the history of the criminalization of people of color, especially in our city.
So let's go off that. In the opinion of Eyes on Surveillance, and I'm going to start calling Eye on Surveillance EOS for anyone listening. So that's what I'm talking about when I say EOS. In EOS's opinion, does surveillance affect every neighborhood and community equally?
It definitely affects everyone in every neighborhood, but we would say not equally. Surveillance has historically been used to control communities of color, to police communities of color, to criminalize communities of color, and we still see that nowadays as well.
Okay, that's very important to keep in mind, this historical effect of surveillance on our communities of color. So can we talk a little bit about facial recognition?
Sure. So facial recognition is a technology that uses basically analyzes facial features and patterns to try to match the image to other images in a database.
So when you say the image, you mean the image of their face?
Yes, correct.
So they try to match it with other images in a database. What are those images in the database? Where's that database from?
It depends, right? We have databases that are used by police and law enforcement, and we also have databases that are part of like Google, right? Big companies that do what we call like mining. Um, and we're seeing like nowadays how putting our picture online, right? That means that these companies have access to your data, to your face, and to do facial recognition and to be able to use your face for different purposes as well. Sometimes we don't even realize that we, when we're going on to Facebook or social media, that we are signing our consent to for our images to be used in that way, in different ways.
Wow, that is a lot to think about next time you sign on to Instagram, right? So is facial recognition the same thing as predictive modeling software? And did I pronounce that right? It's predictive? No?
Predictive?
Predictive, thank you. Predictive modeling software, are they the same thing?
They're not quite the same thing. They're both used by like the police, by ICE, by law enforcement, by government agencies. But predictive policing uses more so, it still uses data and a database, but it uses like algorithms. Um, and let's say like the program that we have in the city, right? Um, they use the data, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. The program is called No Dice. And we also have a history of the mayor, not the current mayor, previous mayor, um, using these systems without telling, basically behind our backs, where nobody knew that they were being used. But the one that is being used currently is called risk terrain modeling, which has algorithms that try to predict with which areas criminal activity is going to happen. And we see a lot of issues with this technology as well with facial recognition, because first of all, the data that is being used is already biased. We have a police department that is under a consent decree because of racial bias. And so all this data is already biased, and they're using this data to try to predict where criminal activity is going to happen. So we can tell if the data is already racially biased, we're going to have predictions that are racially biased as well.
So how do we know that the data is racially biased?
We've seen there's several studies that have been made on predictive policing on facial recognition that have found these results. I was just reading a letter that was written in January by different senators going to the Department of Justice calling for an end to the use of predictive policing models in our country. And this is because it's seen that I'm trying to think the best way to explain it, but if we already see that the police are stopping and using force disproportionately with our communities of color, with our Black community, that is the data that is being used to predict future criminal activity.
So say there was force that was inappropriate, that was used against someone, that data that was already potentially problematic
Yes.
is now going to be replicated to basically confirm an idea that this area is dangerous,
Yes.
even though we falsely created that data.
Exactly. I think also these systems are a way to distract. We've also seen data and research that say that they don't prevent and they don't deter crime, but it's also a way to distract because you're saying, okay, this area has more criminal activity. why don't we look at this area? Why don't we look at education and how well the schools are being funded? Why don't we look at if there's access to healthcare, if the income that families have in that area? And these are all markers that lead right to poverty, to violence. And so it's a way to distract instead of looking at the root causes of violence.
Okay, so that's a really good point, and I want to put a pin in it. We have a caller, Miss Alicia. And let's see, do I press? Oh, no. Hi, Miss Alicia. You're
Yes.
on with the monitors, Mike.
Hello, Monitors Mike. Stella, I just want to, on behalf of NOF, the New Orleans United Front, I just want to just say thank you for what all you do, you and your staff, and even especially Miss Chriselle when she specifically gets us special oatmeal raisin cookies. That's just a deal big to Chriselle. But I want to just thank you because whenever the community calls, you're there, and I appreciate that, and NOF appreciates that. And I just want to say thank you for agreeing to come to our next meeting on November 18th. And Dr. Ashanta Wyatt is our moderator. But thank you so much for all that you do for us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Miss Alicia. That was so nice. Yes, and there is a meeting on November 18th that we will be attending at Cafe Istanbul. It will be happening in the evening, and that will be hosted by the New Orleans United Front. So I'm just putting in that plug right now. Thank you for the reminder, Miss Alicia. So let's go back to this idea of effectively we're using maybe bad policing techniques to now create false data that's informing our idea of where is safe and where isn't. And then effectively we're affirming this falsity over and over and over again by using this model. What about me? Let's just talk about me for a minute, right? I'm Jane. This is an example. I'm Jane. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I go home. I go to work. I go to school. I don't get into any trouble. I'm not involved in any crime. So why should I care that this is being used? How does this affect me?
Well, I would ask, would you think it's okay for the government to be surveilling you, for the government to be accessing your private data, for the government to have all this personal information of yours? But on top of that as well, we have to remind ourselves that all these programs are being paid by our taxes.
Ooh.
And these programs, not only they don't deter crime, they don't prevent crime, they're not effective, and if anything, they harm our community. And that's our tax dollars that are paying for these programs, right? And so do we really want our tax dollars going to these programs that are ineffective and are harmful, or do we want our tax dollars going towards programs that are actually going to help our community, are actually going to give us resources to live healthier lives, to live safer lives as well?
Those are some big points. And I will highlight that when I was preparing for this interview, I read a very interesting article by Politico that talked about the inaccuracies of facial recognition software, and they focused specifically on New Orleans. And it stated that in the majority of the time, the software was unable to effectively make a match. So when you say that this software, like we're funding software that is not necessarily effective, this is what we're talking about. And I would encourage people to read that Politico article that came out in 2023. We can post it somewhere so that way people can know what we're talking about. Now, you just said it doesn't prevent crime. It doesn't make us safe. That's a big point. How do you know it doesn't prevent crime? Because that's how it's kind of been packaged.
Yes. Well, there's different research. I know there's one in San Francisco as well, and I know there's also evidence in our city, and I can give you the detailed information, but I know there's been a misidentification, and I think it was a Black man in the city and he was arrested for a crime that he didn't commit. using the software. And NOPD themselves have admitted that it hasn't led to, a successful arrest of somebody. And I also want to clarify that arresting somebody doesn't mean that they're also guilty.
Right. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. A arrest is not the same as actually clearing the crime, because if you arrest the wrong person, the crime has
Exactly.
not been effectively cleared.
And so we have this different like case studies and research in our city, and in San Francisco we have that letter signed by several senators that are clearly stating this AI is harming our communities, and they're ineffective.
Okay. So some of our listeners might be listening to this and saying, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Wasn't facial recognition banned in New Orleans anyway? I mean, I remember that that after the murder of George Floyd, the community of New Orleans participated in many protests, and I thought one of the takeaways of that time was that facial recognition was effectively banned by city council.
Yes, so that's really how Ion Surveillance started, was the community organizing and saying we don't want these technologies that are going to harm our communities. And it was a big fight, and it was a lot of community members and community organizations coming together to fight for this ordinance that was supported by the, I want to say, Jason Williams, if I'm not mistaken, at that time.
It was supported by Jason Williams and by council member Moreno.
Yes. And so the ordinance was passed against facial recognition in 2020.
2020.
And then in 2021, it was repealed.
And a version of it was reinstated, right? Like, not of the ban, a version of facial recognition was reinstated in October of 2022. And I want to return to this in a second, but I see that we have another caller, Miss Shantae. So you are on with the monitors, Mike.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Stella. You probably already know who I am, but I'm just calling in just to kind of give my comments as it relates to the federal consent decree. I just want to, as a victim myself of a sex crime that's been publicly displayed all over the news, and I spoke on it publicly myself. I was a sex crime victim and a domestic violence victim. And just my experience with trying to bring justice to this matter has taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of partnerships with members of the community and law enforcement, just to get an arrest for this individual. And it saddens to me because it shouldn't take all of that for someone to be held accountable for their crimes that can be proven. I just want to highlight that in November 12th, 2014, almost 10 years ago, that the OIG office conducted a report, conducted an audit and released a report on that day. And their investigations division reviewed 90 sex crime-related reports. And then the auditor cited that there were 23 identified reports that raised concerns about the documentation of the investigations. And even with my investigations that's going on, I've submitted documentation, but the movement in my case took quite a bit of time. And the evidence that I did provide, I believe, was substantial enough to garner at least questioning of the suspect or an arrest months ago, if not a year ago, based on the first report that I made. But I just want to reiterate the importance of the federal consent decree, how it brings a sense of hope for people like myself, just to know that there's an additional layer of reporting that NOPD has to provide updates and what's going on within these units that falls under NOPD, especially the Special Victims Unit. This, me being a victim myself, and now I'm meeting so many other victims that are going through the same thing, and it's heartbreaking because we're tax-paying citizens, and we want to be heard, we want justice, and we want our dollars that we work every day to earn, and the taxes that are being paid to fund the department to, it's that there's some type of measure of work. There's some work ethic going on. Because it's sad that you do pay these taxes, and then when it's, when things happen in your life where you're needing justice, you're needing to be heard, you're being left on deaf ears. So I'm just calling in and hoping that, we can get some sustainment, and hopefully, there's some improvement in that unit, and other people that come behind me won't have to experience the same thing.
Thank you so much for calling and for sharing your story. And we really do appreciate all of your advocacy that you've done for the for yourself, but for the other victims in this matter, and truthfully for the larger community, because I think you've shed a lot of light on the shortcomings that a lot of people have experienced with the sex crimes unit. And so we really do appreciate you bringing so much attention to this issue. You've spoken at City Council, you've spoken to the federal monitors, to the Department of Justice, and this stuff matters. It does push the needle. It's unfortunate that it takes so much work and time and energy from you, as you've highlighted, to be able to successfully see an arrest in your matter, but we really do appreciate everything you've done. Now, I think Ms. Shante brought up some really good points about distrust with seeing the consent decree end in light of these concerns. So I would love to pivot in our remaining minutes to talking about what work EOS is doing around the consent decree and what y'all's position on the potential end of active federal oversight is regarding the consent decree.
Yes, EOS has been doing a lot of work. And actually, when we were doing work around the predictive policing program within NOPD and the DA, which is illegal under municipal code, we found some very troubling things regarding our monitors. So the consent decree monitors, David Douglas and Jonathan Arney. They're the ones who are supposed to hold NOPD accountable for the consent decree. And we found conflict of interest with our monitors, where we see big financial interests for them to say that the consent decree has been successful, for them to get contracts in other cities to be like consultants or be part of the monitoring of the consent decrees in other cities. And I think that's what we've been focusing on a lot, because it's really egregious and deceiving for monitors to be saying that the consent decree is successful when we clearly can see that use of force has been escalating, when we see racial bias, when we see also, we just released this report on the misclassification of data for domestic incidents. This is like sexual assault, domestic violence. For them to say that the consent decree is successful and that this should be the standard is deceiving, is harmful. I think EOS, we do believe that we need better standards. We need federal oversight to get to a place where we don't have these egregious racial bias, racist policing, police brutality. And so our position is we really need to investigate this conflict of interest. And we need to address racist policing. We need to address the misclassification of data. And this report, we're going to release it to the general public really soon. We have already released it as a press release. But it's very horrible. If you read the report, there's complaints about officers being inappropriate with people who are calling about domestic violence or sexual assault, of ignoring of not misclassifying data, but also not reporting the incidents at all at times. And I know this also as I work for an immigrant rights organization, and I've heard stories from immigrants in the city who say, like a particular one that I remember because I am friends with this person is, I called the police once because we were having an altercation with my partner, and the police said to not call unless I'm bleeding. And so we have these horrible ways that police are responding to people needing help. And they're, if anything, they're making it worse. And so we find ourselves in this position where how can we say that the consent decree is successful in this moment?
So, what I'm hearing from you, because that was a big answer and I kind of want to break it up a little bit, is that there were three things that you highlighted. The first thing was a concern about the consent decree being violated because of the use of the predictive policing
Yes.
technology by the district attorney's office to inform NOPD's actions, and that this might violate the consent decree chapter on bias-free policing. So that's the first thing I heard.
Yes.
So if the community is interested just on that issue, how can they learn more?
Oh, well, we have, we're very active on social media. We're on Instagram. It's at EOS underscore NOLA. We also have a website, if I'm not mistaken, that's ionsurveillance.org. And we also plan to do more community events because we do think that this should be a community-led campaign. And we need everyone to be aware of what's going on. And there's so many stories that we still don't know as well that we need to talk about as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then the second thing I heard was concern over potential business relationships that the federal monitors might be entering into with current or former NOPD employees,
Yes.
and that in light of those relationships, their judgment is compromised. Right? This is
Yes,
the position
absolutely.
of EOS. Okay, so say I'm listening and I'm concerned just about that issue. What should I do?
Right now, we have a petition going out to demand an investigation into these conflict of interests. And I want to put it out there that you can look up a NOLA.com article on the public hearings last week where Ashley Burns, who's also part of the consent decree monitor team, herself stated that she also has concerns on conflict of interest within the deputy monitor. And she also stated that she agrees with the concerns of the communities. But yeah, so going back to the petition, it's a petition basically asking for an investigation by the Department of Justice into the conflicts of interest within our monitors. We have a very short link that can be accessed, but is also on Instagram. It's bit.ly /Ponzi, PONZI dash Watchers, WATCHERS.
Okay. So your third point, your third point about the consent decree was concerns about the classification of domestic violence complaints. So complaints regarding how a DV investigation is conducted or how officers talk to survivors who are trying to report domestic violence. And so this report looked specifically at then the subsequent misconduct investigations to see if they were properly classified and thoroughly investigated. So this is more focusing, there's an element that is talking about these specialized units that do this type of work, but also there's an element about it that's, again, about the Public Integrity Bureau, correct?
Yes, and we just released this report, so it is a topic that we're still developing, but we see glaring issues with this reporting and the underreporting as well.
Okay. Well, these are three very important issues that I think the community should look into and make decisions about themselves. But we understand EOS's position on it, and I really appreciate you providing that high-level summary of it. And we'll have to talk again about this misconduct classification report that y'all just issued, because spoiler, OIPM also weighed in on that issue, and so we would love to be able to talk about that more. So thank you so much for coming on our show today. And again, if you are interested in learning more about EOS, please go onto their social media site. That's EOS_NOLA on Instagram, and they have a lot of resources available for you. So that wraps up today's episode of Monitor's Mic. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our callers and to EOS, Edith Romero, for coming on the show. Thank you for having these crucial conversations about police oversight and community safety. If you've missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on past issues, please visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov or follow us on social media for updates and news. On Instagram, we're at NOLA OIPM, and Facebook, we are the New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. Until next time, stay informed, stay involved, and stay committed to building a safer community. This has been the Monitor's Mic.